I knew something was wrong before the radio said a word. The night felt too heavy, like the air had been holding its breath. It was just past 11, a thin mist drifting over the empty streets, streetlights turning the wet pavement into long ribbons of dull gold. I sat behind the wheel with a paper cup of stale coffee warming my palms, waiting for the next call that never comes when you expect it. The cab smelled like antiseptic and old rain. My partner hummed along with the scanner, a soft, tired sound that barely covered the buzz of the dash. We'd had an ordinary shift so far, minor crash, a dizzy spell, nothing that sticks. The siren light threw a faint blue onto the hood, steady and calm, like a heartbeat at rest. I watched it pulse and told myself to enjoy the quiet. Nights like this teach you to be grateful for silence, even when silence feels like a warning. Then the radio cracked once, just static. It faded, but the feeling didn't. I looked at the road ahead and knew this shift wasn't done with me. We'd been running the same route for hours, weaving through quiet neighborhoods that looked half asleep. The world outside the windshield was all fog and sodium light, the kind that made everything look softer than it really was. Davis sat beside me, tapping his pen against the clipboard, waiting for another call to break the monotony. The radio mumbled codes in the background, nothing urgent, mostly transfers and minor injuries. I remember the smell of coffee that had gone cold and the faint buzz from the fluorescent light above our heads. Inside the ambulance, the world was smaller, safer. There's a rhythm to the job that becomes second nature. Gloves on, vitals check, report to dispatch, repeat. You start to think you've seen everything a night can throw at you. At one point, Davis cracked a joke about our luck. "Too quiet," he said, yawning. I laughed, but my mind was elsewhere, following the faint hum of the oxygen tank in the back. That sound always calmed me. It was constant, predictable, the heartbeat of the vehicle. We stopped near the hospital lot to stretch. Steam from the vents rose into the mist like thin smoke. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of asphalt after rain. A few other crews were parked nearby, windows fogged from heat and exhaustion. Everyone looked the same at that hour, worn down just trying to make it to morning. Then the radio crackled again, sharp enough to make both of us flinch. I turned the volume down, but a voice cut through the static anyway. It wasn't clear, just a fragmented sentence. Numbers, maybe a location. The signal died before I could make it out. Davis shrugged it off, saying it was probably another unit out of range. I wanted to believe him, but something about the way the static lingered didn't feel right. It sounded like breathing. The next call came just after midnight. It didn't sound strange at first. A routine pickup, single patient, unresponsive. But the voice on the radio had a faint echo, like it wasn't coming from the usual line. "Unit 12, respond to mile marker 41, it said, then cut off halfway through the confirmation code. I looked at Davis. He frowned, twisting the dial to clear the signal. "Dispatch, can you repeat?" he asked. Silence. Then a low hum filled the cab, followed by a faint, broken reply. "Patient. Back seat. Please hurry." The voice didn't sound like anyone we knew from dispatch. Too soft, almost trembling. The digital screen on our console flickered. The coordinates flashed once, then disappeared. I tried re-entering them, but the system froze. No address, no update, nothing logged. Davis gave a nervous laugh, the kind people use when logic starts running thin. "Probably a glitch," he muttered. "We've had worse." Still, he wrote down the mile marker from memory. We'd driven that stretch dozens of times, a lonely road cutting through the woods on the edge of town. Nothing out there but old power lines and rusted signs. The kind of place people drive fast just to feel less alone. We called dispatch again for confirmation, but the line stayed dead. Not even static this time, just emptiness. The longer it stayed quiet, the more wrong it felt. It wasn't like losing signal, it was like no one was there to answer. Finally, Davis turned to me. "Let's check it anyway," he said, his voice low. "If someone's really out there..." He didn't finish the sentence. I flipped the siren on and the blue light spilled across the fog. The sound echoed through the still air, fading faster than it should have. As we pulled away, I glanced at the rearview mirror out of habit. For a second, I could have sworn I saw a shape sitting in the back. Too still, too dark. Then the light shifted and it was gone. The road to mile marker 41 was almost completely dark. The rain had eased, but the mist clung to the ground like smoke. Our headlights reached only a few feet ahead, the beam cutting through the fog in a pale tunnel. The forest on both sides was silent, branches slick with water, bending under their own weight. The tires hissed against the wet asphalt as we slowed near the marker. The GPS showed nothing, but we could see a faint shimmer ahead. Something metallic catching the light. I pulled over to the shoulder, and the sound of the engine dying left an uncomfortable quiet hanging between us. Davis grabbed the flashlight, and we stepped out together. The air was colder than before, sharp enough to sting when I breathed. The beam swept over the road and stopped on a broken mirror lying by the guardrail. A few feet beyond that, a car sat half in the ditch, headlights off, one door cracked open. The license plate was coated in mud, unreadable, no movement, no voices. We approached slowly, the only sound our boots sinking into the soft gravel. I called out, "Standard procedure. EMS, is anyone here?" My words came back to me like a whisper through the trees. The car's interior was fogged up from the inside. I wiped the glass with my sleeve and my stomach tightened. There was someone sitting in the back seat, head tilted slightly toward the window, eyes half open. The face was pale, unmoving. Davis moved closer, tapping the glass. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" No reaction. The front seats were empty, no keys in the ignition. I noticed something strange as we circled the car. No footprints, no tire marks beyond our own. It was as if the car had just appeared there, perfectly still. A gust of wind pushed through the trees, carrying a faint metallic smell. Not quite blood, not quite rust. I felt the hair on my neck stand up. Davis looked at me, flashlight trembling slightly. "You seeing this?" he asked. I nodded once. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Let's get her out." She didn't move when we opened the door. The hinges groaned, breaking the silence that had been pressing in around us since we stopped. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, skin pale against the thin fabric of what looked like a hospital gown. I remember thinking she didn't look injured, just empty. Her eyes were half open, glassy, staring at nothing. Davis leaned in first, checking for vitals. "Pulse is weak," he said quietly. "She's breathing but shallow." I handed him the oxygen mask while I called in the report. No response from dispatch, only a faint crackle of static. I tried again, louder this time, but the signal was gone. We worked quickly, moving her onto the stretcher. Her body was light, limp, like she'd been drained of all strength. The smell of damp fabric and disinfectant hung in the air as we lifted her into the back of the ambulance. Davis adjusted the straps while I checked her pupils. Slow reaction, but still alive. When I spoke to her, I kept my tone calm the way I always did with trauma patients. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her lips twitched. For a second, I thought she might respond, but nothing came. Just a faint sound. A breath. Or maybe a sigh. The strangest thing wasn't her silence. It was her temperature. Her skin was cold. Colder than the night air. Even with the heater running, the chill seemed to follow us inside the ambulance. Before I closed the back doors, I turned to look at the road one last time. The car sat exactly as we'd found it, untouched, headlights dark, windshield glistening with dew. No signs of struggle, no footprints but ours. Davis settled beside her, placing the monitor leads across her chest. The beeping started slow and irregular, but it was there. I climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine came alive, headlights cutting through the fog again. As we pulled away, I caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her eyes were still open, staring straight ahead, like she knew the road better than I did. The drive back toward the hospital should have taken 15 minutes, maybe less. The roads were nearly empty and the storm had thinned to a light drizzle. But every mile felt slower than the one before. Inside the cab, the heater was running, yet the air still bit at the skin like we were driving through ice. Davis kept his eyes on the monitor. "Vitals are fluctuating," he murmured. The screen flickered between numbers that didn't make sense, heart rate rising, dropping, then spiking again in perfect rhythm with the hum of the tires. He tapped the display, frowning. "Equipment's acting up." I didn't answer. Something in the tone of the engine had changed, a low vibration that seemed to pulse under the floor. It wasn't mechanical, it felt alive. The radio crackled. For a second, I thought dispatch was finally back online. But what came through wasn't a code or a call sign. It was a whisper, just a few words, faint but clear. "Don't stop." I looked at Davis, his hand froze on the IV line. "You heard that too?" he asked quietly. I nodded, eyes fixed on the dark road. Behind us, the stretcher creaked. A small sound, but sharp enough to slice through the air. Davis turned his flashlight toward the patient. She hadn't moved, at least not that we could see. Her chest rose and fell in shallow rhythm. Her hands were still crossed, her face still pale. But there was something off about her reflection in the side window. The glass showed her head turned toward me, even though she was facing straight ahead. For half a second, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Then the light flickered again and the reflection corrected itself. Davis muttered something under his breath, adjusting the straps tighter. "Almost there," he said. The smell of metal filled the cabin, not blood, sharper, colder. I focused on the road, forcing my mind to stay anchored to the moment. That's when I heard it, her voice soft as a sigh drifting from the stretcher. She said my name. For a long second, I thought I'd imagined it. The sound was too faint, too soft, but it carried my name clearly through the hum of the road. Davis looked at me, wide-eyed, waiting for me to explain it away. I couldn't. The hair on my arm stood up under the gloves. The air in the ambulance thickened, heavy enough that even breathing felt wrong. Then the monitor alarmed, one shrill, piercing tone. The heart rate shot up, then flatlined. I swerved the ambulance onto the shoulder, lights spinning against the fog. "She's coding," Davis said, already on the compressions. The stretcher rattled under his hands. The monitor beeped once, then cut out completely. The siren was still wailing, but it sounded distant, like it belonged to another world. I grabbed the defibrillator, charging it. Clear. The jolt made her body twitch violently, then go still. The next reading came up blank. No pulse. Nothing. Davis exhaled, shaking his head. "She's gone." Before I could respond, the lights overhead flickered off, plunging us into darkness. Only the faint blue from the control panel remained, painting the inside of the ambulance in ghostly color. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then a scraping sound. Slow, deliberate, from the stretcher. I turned and every muscle in my body locked. She was sitting upright. The straps were still fastened tight across her chest and legs, but her upper body had lifted, spine rigid, eyes wide open. Her lips moved again, but this time the voice wasn't faint. It was steady, almost calm. You shouldn't have come. The flashlight in Davis's hand slipped and hit the floor, rolling under the seat. He reached for her, but the moment he did, the ambulance lurched, engine roaring back to life on its own. I grabbed the wheel, forcing control. Hold on! The lights snapped back on. The siren blared, and just as suddenly she was gone. The stretcher was empty, straps still buckled tight. Davis was frozen, pale as paper. Where is she? I didn't answer. I couldn't, because the rear doors were wide open and we never stopped driving. By the time we reached the hospital, neither of us had said a word. The siren had died somewhere along the drive, replaced by the low hum of the tires on wet pavement. The back doors stayed shut the whole way, though both of us kept glancing at the rearview mirror like we expected them to fly open again. The ER bay lights washed everything in white, harsh and unreal after the darkness we'd just left. Davis jumped out first, calling for help. Voice hoarse. 2 nurses came running, pulling the stretcher down. But when they swung open the doors, their hands froze. There was nothing there. The stretcher was empty, the blanket still folded, the monitor leads dangling loose. Not a single sign that anyone had been inside. The charge nurse looked at me like I'd lost my mind when I told her we'd just performed CPR in transit. You must have the wrong unit, she said, flipping through the report sheet. No call logged from dispatch, no patient by that description. I asked her to check again. She did. Still nothing. Davis tried to replay the onboard footage, but the dash cam showed only static for the last half hour. Every second of that drive, gone. Even the hospital timestamp skipped from 12:14 to 12:47 like the world had blinked and erased everything in between. We stayed there for hours, arguing, searching, trying to make sense of it. The car at mile marker 41 was reported to the police later that night, but when they got there, the road was clear. No vehicle, no mirror, not even tire tracks. When the report finally closed, the supervisor said it must have been fatigue, a shared hallucination. You've been working too many night shifts, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. We drove back to the station in silence. The ambulance smelled faintly of disinfectant and something else I couldn't place. Cold, metallic, familiar. Before heading inside, I checked the back one last time. On the stretcher, there was a single wet handprint, small, delicate, right where she'd been lying. I couldn't let it go. No matter how many reports they filed or how many supervisors told us to forget it, something about that night kept gnawing at me. I'd been through hundreds of calls, seen death more times than I could count, but never like that. Never something that simply vanished. A few days later, I went digging through the archives, old dispatch logs, handwritten records, anything that might explain the phantom call. Most of it was routine. Traffic collisions, false alarms, a few welfare checks. But buried near the bottom of the incident reports was a single sheet with the same coordinates. Mile marker 41. The date was 2 years old. The notes read, single vehicle accident, 1 fatality, female found unresponsive in rear seat. The name was smudged, but one detail was clear. Patient transported by Unit 12. My unit. Only one problem, I wasn't working that night. I checked the paramedic roster from that year. The lead on that call had been a man named Richard Lowe. Cause of death, cardiac arrest en route to hospital. Time of death, 12:47 a.m., the same missing 30 minutes from our dash cam. I found his obituary. He'd been a veteran EMT, 20 years on the job. The report said he collapsed while driving back from an emergency pickup. No passengers survived, no records of who the patient was. When I showed Davis the file, he went pale. You think it's connected, he whispered. I didn't answer. The silence was enough. Later that night, I drove out to that stretch of road again. The mist hung low, just like before. The guardrail was still bent, the ground still scarred where the accident had been. but something else caught my eye. A small wooden cross half buried in the dirt, its paint almost gone. A single tag hung from it, swaying gently in the wind. I wiped away the dirt and read the name carved into the wood. Richard Lowe. The flashlight trembled in my hand. Behind me, the trees rustled softly, though there was no wind. Somewhere in the static of the night, I thought I heard my radio whisper again. Only this time it said, "You were supposed to stop." It's been months since that night, but sleep hasn't felt the same since. Every time I close my eyes, I see the fog curling across the road, the blue flash of the siren fading into darkness, and that empty stretcher swaying under the fluorescent lights. People think the worst part of this job is watching someone die. It's not. It's realizing that sometimes death doesn't stay where you leave it. Davis left the service not long after. He said he needed a break, but I knew better. He'd started hearing the radio too, faint whispers calling his name during normal calls, bits of static that sounded almost like breathing. We both pretended it was just in our heads, but there's only so long you can pretend. I stayed, maybe because I didn't know what else to do. Maybe because I needed to know if she'd come back. The ambulance still smells the same: metal, rubber, antiseptic. Every time I sit behind the wheel, I glance at the mirror before starting the engine. Most nights it's just me in the empty cabin, but sometimes when the streetlights flicker just right, I catch a reflection that shouldn't be there. A faint outline in the back seat, perfectly still. Watching. The new recruits talk about ghosts like they're stories told to scare rookies. I let them believe that, because if I told them the truth, they'd never step into an ambulance again. I still drive the night shift. The radio's been replaced twice, the dash cam 3 times, but the static always finds its way back. Some nights when the roads are quiet and the fog starts to rise, the speaker clicks on all by itself. No call sign, no voice I recognize, just one soft message that never changes. Unit 12, respond. And I do, every time, even though I know no one's waiting on the other end. Because that's the thing about this job. You don't get to choose which ghosts you carry. Some ride beside you, some sit quietly in the back, and some never left at all.